if the government suddenly just gave up its right to legislate and just relied on the lazy people, as they pointed out, to initiate agenda. Now, one thing I did mention to Abdul Rahman was, please, in this scenario, I understand that you have your sentiments, so please do not talk about Valentine's Day. However, Abdul Rahman, being the person that he is, chose to ignore me. So, that's what complaint aside, me being the person with the smaller beard, I must adhere to what he said. Thank you, Morgan, once again. Alright, now this whole concept of democracy and the fact that people are not being listened and etc. Now the picture that the opening government was trying to paint for us, ladies and gentlemen, I mean to question that picture, because if that is true, then I would really have nothing much to say, because of course if people are not being given the right, please give them right and vote for open government. But is it that simple? For that reason, let's analyze what they showed to us. They showed to us and gave us examples of where citizens were able to voice their opinions and how successful they were. Secondly, they talked about how corporations at times went astray with the interest of the people. Thirdly, they talked about collective morality. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do one more thing, and I'm going to counter what Aisha said about policy, because I'm still not happy, Aisha. So coming back to what happened. State initiated or citizen initiated. All the examples given by Tara and Asad, did you notice something? They weren't citizen initiated, they were actually initiated by the state. And the state actually was overlooking them, and they gave the agenda, and the citizens voted for it. And that is something we agree with, that is perfectly right. If that is the case, if that's the kind of democracy you want, then vote open opposition. Now moving on to the corporation and state. The whole scenario that was painted was that Monsanto came in, provided killer seeds, everyone died, and nothing happened. But is that exactly what happened? Monsanto came in. Even the people were happy. The farmers bought those seeds not because the government forced them to buy them, but the farmers themselves believed. And when they found out the seeds were not good, they stopped buying. And that is what we call consumer democracy. No government in a democracy can force people to buy something, and that is okay. But you do not require legislation to be passed so that people stop buying. Just stop buying, for God's sake. You really do not have a government in the first place. Now, understanding that what happened, let's talk about corporations in the first place. They showed us the corporations are those organizations that influence the government in a terrible, terrible way. And they get away with lots of money without anything adding to it. Ladies and gentlemen. Hi, sure. Now we have to understand one thing. Why are these corporations so influential? Let's take the tobacco industry in the first place. The tobacco industry in Pakistan itself, the textile industry in Pakistan itself employs millions and millions and millions of the people they are trying to protect, and their corporations are also protecting their interests when they're also trying to promote them. So what happens when these tobacco industries, I'm not against smoking, maybe I'm not, it's not really the matter. The problem I have is these corporations, they also represent a majority or at least a significant portion of your society. In that circumstance, please Aisha. In that circumstance, we believe that even pushing that agenda, because of that influence they have, that is why the governments listen to them, because they know if they do not listen to these corporations, many people will be affected. And that is not right now, Dayal. I'll take 1 or 2 minutes. Now, moving on to the second point, the collective morality and the Umar Bashir arguments. Now, we saw that Zanyal and Aisha were of the opinion that collective morality is what holds us together. And that is true. However, how do we form consensus as to what collective morality is? Since the dawn of mankind, ladies and gentlemen, I've always wanted to say this in my speech, since the dawn of mankind, we have seen people springing up from all corners of the earth, trying to make sense of their living. What happened, ladies and gentlemen? You had anarchy at first, you had small villages fighting with each other to develop their own sense of what they thought was right. And one day, somebody sensible came up and told them, let's just take one person representing your interest from each village and sit down and form this section. 2,000 years later, we had a speech from Dada Al-Azhar which shows to challenge that notion. However, we will not listen to that because of the last example of Umar Bashir. Why not that?
Anand, we are not against your form of parliamentary governance. What we are saying is that people initiate a referenda that can change or bring down legislation.
I'm going to talk to you about that as well. However, what you seem to have represented is that the government itself has become redundant. So if that is your principle, why not go away with the government in the first place? But the point that they gave was that the government is required to administer. And that is a fancy word today. We need to understand what administration entails. Is it just to say, yes sir, this is what is going to happen and force seats down?
What people ask you.
Government, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, thank you, Landa. I'll be moving on to that in my positive case. So Umar Bashir is something that I left behind now. Umar Bashir himself enacted a peace agreement that not everyone was in favor of. However, this was a tough decision. And because of the fact that people before him had voted that Umar Bashir was important, was what's the word, credible enough to make these decisions, Umar Bashir made that tough decision. If we were to go with the opening government, Umar Bashir would have been removed and we were resorted back to 2000 years before when the villagers are fighting for each other's interest rather than the collective interest. And that is what I'm going to talk to you about. The facilitation of the citizens and the stability. And in the overtime that I'm going to undertake, because really we're not in a tournament, so I'm going to take 1 more minute to take down Aisha's policy. Because Aisha is 1 minute. And that's pretty much about it, ladies and gentlemen. Only now, the positive line of argument that I'm going to bring forth is simple. Facilitation of the citizen, facilitation of each and every one of you sitting here. The fact, ladies and gentlemen, that you're sitting here without having to worry whether Basant will be banned or whether not Basant should be banned. We're not worrying about the fact that army should be sent to Afghanistan or not right now. And the fact of the matter remains that, ladies and gentlemen, you tend to think of these matters. But what do? Are you required to stand up every day, leave your home places, leave your work, and go out to initiate some referenda and try to collect as many villagers as you can? No, you do not, ladies and gentlemen, because those villagers were sensible. They found out one logical stream in their bare heads, and that logical stream was very simple. That if we could somehow assign specialists from our groups who represent our interests, then maybe we could live life and also our functions will be representative, and from time to time they will ask us whether we're doing right. And those time to times come every 4 years, ladies and gentlemen, and that is why we believe that facilitation itself is an instrumental function as far as society is involved, ladies and gentlemen. I won't be able to elaborate because Aisha is not really listening to anything from him to her. I'll be going over time. But however, I'll be 1 second more. Alright. So I've given you an understanding of why facilitation is important, and I've given you some sense of how social life requires that you do not have to worry about these matters every day. Worry about them, but do not worry about leaving your job, leaving everything that you do just so that something gets done, which brings me down to their policies. Now, having 5%, now let's just assume that Aisha was right and Abdul Rahman was wrong. My one stab at him. That Aisha said 5% of your population votes and the rest of them are lazy. So let's do this, let's burden them more so that they are required. Their laziness is something that you require for any legislation to be passed. Thank you very much. So the point that I made, ladies and gentlemen, that governments lie.
Now, we have the closing opposition, hopefully the demonstration. Aisha, what's wrong?
I need a stopwatch which works. I haven't.
Guys, Hamza Ijaz from the closing government.
Everyone hear me? Alright, members of the Circus House, I am not going to spend much time on the opposition's case, simply because opposition never really had a principle, never really had a case. The House simply wouldn't let citizen-initiated referenda be employed because they don't trust the citizens to make the right decision. However, they trust the same citizens to elect your members of the parliament. And they are perfectly fine with that. In essence, members of Focused House, is the government opposition of today any different in trusting the people to making the right decision? Because that is essentially what the government of today is telling you. They believe that they can make the right decision when they elect people to legislate for them, but due to some uncomprehendable reasons, they wouldn't be able to exercise the same judgment once you let them exercise their judgment in terms of citizen-initiated referenda. That is all that is to be said on the opposition case so far. So let's move on to the extension of the government, closing government. Sit down, both of you. The fact that the government will be running the extension on 4 tiers. Firstly, I'll be showing to you how it is, by initiating citizen-initiated referenda, we'll be challenging the paternalistic view of the state and how that needs to be taken into consideration. Secondly, I'll be talking about how it would ensure that the resistance to the implementation of these legislations does not take place. Thirdly, I'll be showing to you how it renders greater credibility and strength to the political process, rendering it immune from external influences. Now, then Morgan would be coming up here and show to you how, as is shown in V for Vendetta as well, that how government needs to fear its people and not people fearing the government. That's something that Morgan would be talking to you about in his positive case. So let's move on to the extension of the teen government, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is the entire case from the opposition was this assertion, based on the assertion that people cannot make the right decisions for themselves. As pointed out by Daniel as well, yes, we are allowed to make wrong decisions in the democracies as well. We are allowed to smoke. Everyone has the right to smoke, knowing it is a bad decision, yet we allow individuals to make that decision for themselves. We allow people to choose the members in the parliament, trusting them that they might be making the bad decision, but yet we trust them with that, ladies and gentlemen. So, essentially, ladies and gentlemen, in democracy, we allow people to make these bad decisions, even in certain cases they might make a bad decision, but we trust them to be the ones making the decision. And that is something that we believe needs to be, the fact that only government can make the right decision for you needs to be challenged in this case, ladies and gentlemen. Because in order to involve people, in order to ensure that you're not creating a political elite, ladies and gentlemen, what you need to do is, you need to involve more people into the political process. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it is the claim of the individuals and it is the right of the individuals to initiate or be involved directly into the political process. Because we believe that through these initiatives, what the governments can do, what the people can do is prevent governments from acting in conflict with their interests. For example, they can stop the government from entering into agreements with certain companies, multinationals, which are contrary to the interests of the people at large. So that is where we believe that the government's view of being a paternalistic figure needs to change, and therefore we believe that is something that has to be accepted in the August House. Go ahead.
Since people can be swayed by jingoism, your case is the precise reason why somebody like Sherry Rahman has to withdraw her bill to amend the blasphemy law because people will...
These very people can be swayed by the rhetoric of the political parties as well to vote for them. If you trust them to be not to be swayed by the rhetoric of the political parties, why not trust them in the citizen-initiated referenda? That's not the answer in your particular case. Then moving on to the issue of, ladies and gentlemen, the resistance to implementation. Now, that is something that we have seen over time and over again, because these legislations essentially sometimes can not be in consonance with what the people of the country want. You see people coming out in France protesting against legislation, taking arms against the government. And in cases of England, ladies and gentlemen, where the increase in student fee obviously led to the issue of people coming out on street protesting against the government. So if you initiate citizen-initiated referenda, what you can do is you can know what the people want, and instead of coming up and resisting the implementation of these laws would not exist in the first place. That is another advantage that we have of citizen-initiated referenda. So moving on to the other issue of how it renders greater credibility to the government and the political process. Now, essentially the problem that has been there with the governments in the third world countries, also in countries which have infant democracies, is that the governments stop catering to the interests of the majority or the masses after a certain amount of time, leading to a lack of support from the people of that particular country to the government in power. Consequently, members of the August House, what happens is that these governments are prone to external influences because they know they don't enjoy the confidence of the masses. Consequently, puppet governments such as those of Musharraf in Pakistan would accept demands of America, of the United States of America, and not stand up for the rights of its own people. On the other hand, you have Ahmadinejad, ladies and gentlemen, who would resist the pressure from external influences because he knows whatever he is doing is in perfectly consonance with the interests of the people. Now, we don't say they've got referenda in Iran, but we are saying this, once you have greater support, once you have a greater backing of the individuals, that makes your decisions, that makes your... This is a protected minute, Abdurrahman, sit down. Now, this obviously makes your government more strong, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, if you have a government that enjoys the backing of the masses, the laws that it has initiated and the policies that it has initiated due to those laws are in consonance with the masses' interests and the viewpoint that the majority holds. Not only that, there is no such issues of implementation of these laws because they already enjoy the support of the masses. And finally, you're challenging the notion that individuals cannot make the right decision or are not empowered to make the decisions for themselves. So on all three accounts, members of this House, we believe that the government's case, and to be more specific, the closing government's case, provides you reasons enough to be voting for citizen-initiated referenda. So in essence, ladies and gentlemen, the government bench does take the debate, and to be more specific, the closing government gets the first.
Now we come to the closing opposition. The first speaker, Vikas Peer. Down the first, Vikas.
Officially, this round should be termed as the Masters Embarrassment round. But anyway, we still are confused as to how the citizen-initiated legislation program is going to work. And most of the fault goes to the opening government because we do not know whether, by definition, are the citizens only initiating this legislation, which will ultimately be scrutinized by the parliament and go through all the processes that normal legislation goes through, or will this legislation become a law simply by initiation by a group which we do not know what it really means, what are the number of people who should constitute that group. Maybe Vikas and I could be a group, the two of them could be a group, even they could be a group when it comes to what they need to wear in the morning, but we don't know what the group is. So essentially, for all practical purposes, you're proposing a motion which allows two people like us to stand up, initiate a legislation, then through jingoism, through populism, and you know we are popular,
Democracy.
and we can sway people, we will be able to get that legislation through a process without any accountability. Hamza raised a valid point. Hamza said that if you're trusting the people to decide who goes to the parliament and who becomes a parliamentarian, why are you not trusting the same people to initiate legislation? And herein lies the fundamental distinction that lawmaking and parliament, when people elect parliamentarians, those parliamentarians, when they make law, are accountable, which citizen-initiated legislation would not be. That you will then have overturn of legislation as a result of popular votes, like last week bill going back, and we have examples which we will be covering in our positive case of how Mussolini and Hitler used citizen-initiated legislation to do whatever their context. But before I refute any of their case anymore, let me give you the extension of the closing opposition. We believe the promise of stability, democracy, and maximum protection for minorities should be ensured, and one of the ways of ensuring that, in fact a very important way, is to make sure that you do not allow citizen-initiated legislation. Secondly, we believe that by allowing citizen-initiated legislation, you are completely ignoring the internal mechanisms that are already available within the parliamentary form of system, such as a strong, vibrant judiciary, which could be made more vibrant, such as other alternatives like legislation, in case you have a redundant parliament, through the executive, through presidents, and they've given us examples of that as well. Now moving to the refutations. Aisha said that apparently there is a problem with law and laws made are not right. And we don't really understand what really was the problem. Was there a problem with the internal morality of the law, or was there a problem with representation? Because if there was a problem with internal morality of the law, then we don't know how that law changes when you have citizen-initiated programs. And I'm beginning with this point in my constructive case. But the only thing they said, and this was only, I was only assuming on their part, the only thing they said while establishing their point was that the voter turnout is low. And there are multiple reputations for that. Firstly, as rightly pointed out, this was a factual inaccuracy. Even Abdul Rahman said that there were 45% people. In fact, the figure was somewhere between 30 to 40%. Secondly, the question is, if there's a problem with people not voting, what is the reason for that? The reason for that is that maybe people are not interested. Then what makes you feel that through your process, the same number of people would come out and become part of that referenda and thereby enough credibility to the lawmaking? No guarantees given from that side. And most importantly, if there is a problem with voter turnout, improve that problem. There are internal mechanisms available. Probably you can make voting compulsory so that everyone comes out and vote. Secondly, if there was a problem with representation, and it's a theme that was covered by both the teams, they somehow seem to believe that we're living in this ugly world where there's a total disjoint between parliamentarians and the people.
Yes.
We believe that is not the case. Firstly, and secondly, even if it is the case, then your solution is not the right solution. Because if you have parliamentarians who have to scrutinize the law, as I've said, we do not really know whether that law would be scrutinized or won't be scrutinized. In case that law would be scrutinized, Aisha, both of you had your chance, you didn't take any points of information. We are confused, the entire house is confused. If that law is to be scrutinized by the parliament, then the same parliamentarians will have all the problems that you've highlighted. The bill is initiated by a group, but the parliamentarians strike down the strike down the law when it comes to the parliament, so the law goes. If there will be no parliamentary scrutiny, then we are allowing a law to be passed without letting that law go through a very important parliamentary scrutiny process. Because we have committees which are made which decide the nitty and gritties of law. How, for instance, would you define Jews after the Holocaust? How, for instance, would you define an enmity when you have to make a law? All of these things are not decided by the people because the people are not technically equipped to do that. As moving then to some of the construction of our case. Like, we believe that there are internal mechanisms available. Makas has already pointed out, and we'll be dealing with this point as well, how minorities can be protected. But over and above that, we believe there are internal mechanisms available within a parliament. Internal in their case were examples like Bill Clinton coming up with laws. This is a perfect example of a redundant democracy like Pakistan, where for a period of 8 to 9 years, democracy was not doing what Aisha and Daniel said democracy should be doing. But we had legislation through the president. We had CCP ordinance being made. We had women protection ordinance being made. We believe that there are internal mechanisms available which can be fully utilized. In case of Bhopal and other examples that they came up with, there is judiciary which will make sure that if there is something which goes against the interests of the people, then those laws will be struck down. All in all, members of this August House, we believe that the very reason why this motion must not pass is because it assumes a notion of democratic system which is ugly. We believe in that ugly system, even their model of citizen-initiated programs would not work. However, if you believe in this side of the house, we believe that the internal mechanisms that can be fully utilized. Over and above that, we believe such legislation will be based on jingoism, will be based on popular support, and minorities will not be protected at all. All in all, please vote for any of the opposition.
Thank you, Don. Now we have the second speaker of the Scool Government, Facebook Brigade, Mr. Radiant Moore.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. What an incredibly warm welcome. Nothing that I haven't noticed since my time in Pakistan. The welcome has always been incredibly warm, so thank you. That bit of shameful populism aside, Masters debates are about learning. So what have you learned in this debate today? You've learned that you shouldn't really introduce 5 points as the Prime Minister in case you can't get through them all and your parliament doesn't quite pick up the slack. Not to run a first op case that relies on the same idea of rational choice as the prop case you're proposing. You've learned not to speak for so long that the audience slow hands claps you off the stage. You've learned not to base an entire op extension on the practical issues with opening government and ignore the principles that closing government bring to the debate. And most of all, you've learned that closing government have won this debate already before. But why exactly is that true? I'm going to tell you. When I stood up earlier and asked a point of information about whether the state should mandate what I wear in the morning, it was dismissed rather flippantly and continued to be so by the opposition bench because they failed to see the importance of what I was really asking. My question wasn't about pettifogging issues of whether I wear a shirt or a t-shirt or a jacket. My question was about whether we should empower individuals to take control over the matters that most affect them or not, or whether we should always abdicate our own responsibility for our lives to some political elite that we imagine is always munificent and beneficent and always acting in our own interest. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, if they want to live in Alice in Wonderland, that's fine. Unfortunately, on planet reality, we recognise that governments, A, do not always fulfil their promises because they cannot, or do not always fulfil their promises because they will not. In either case, ladies and gentlemen, we are more than justified in asserting our right to determine the legislation that governs our lives. No, thank you, sir. We heard very clearly from the opening government exactly why these types of referenda were important. We were told by the opening opposition, oh, people are irrational, they make bad choices. Yeah, I'll get to you in a second. They make bad choices all the time. There's jingoism, there's populism. Apart from that one day every 4 years, when we magically become super-rational beings, capable of